Joining me today is Dr. Jane Goodall, one of the most powerful voices speaking on behalf of the Earth today. Dr. Goodall has spent over 45 years researching chimpanzees in Tanzania, and today she joins us to talk about the new film, Jane's Journey, which is the only true life story of her journey. Jane, thank you so very much for joining us today. I spoke to Lorenz before we sat down and asked him what it was like to be a fly on the wall in your life. And he said it was the most privileged 6 years of his, that he thoroughly enjoyed every moment of the journey with you. So Jane's Journey is the first true story of your life. How do you feel about that?
Well, you know, there have been documentaries before. There's been an IMAX, and all of them have kind of looked back. But this one was different in that it's much more, you know, there was much more in-depth interviews about the past and the different people who were part of my past, and, you know, a little bit of discussion about marriage and divorce and grieving, and so it was quite much more in-depth as far as my personal life was concerned.
Now, your personal life is something that, for me, knowing your story as I've my whole life grown up knowing, you know, your work with the chimpanzees and how much you've done, it's always been very much iconic to someone, and to sit down with you is such a privilege and an honor. And
I find I'm just me.
And it's lovely to know that you're just you. We were all at Twitter all day that Dr. Jane Goodall was coming to sit down with us. And the work you've done, this is the 50th anniversary of where that started. How did that start? What was that started that journey for you?
Well, it started when I was a tiny little girl, dreaming of going to Africa and living with animals and writing books about them, and having an amazing mother who always supported my dreams and encouraged me never to give up when everybody else laughed at me. And, you know, saving up money, getting out, and then the real breakthrough was meeting the late Louis Leakey, who amazingly offered me this opportunity to go and study not just any animal but chimpanzees. And this to a young woman straight from England who had no degree of any sort. Pretty amazing.
And he took a chance on you.
He took a big chance and stuck his neck out, and it was very hard to get the money. So finally, 6 months from a wealthy American businessman. It was very hard to get the permission from the authorities in what was then part of the British colonial empire, Tanganyika. It's Tanzania today. And the only reason that he was able to persuade them to allow me to go there in the first place, because they didn't want to take responsibility for me, was if I had a companion. So the person who volunteered to come was that same amazing mother. You see, so we began 50 years ago, come July, we set foot for the first time. And she was looking after the camp, and, you know, she had a really tough time. I just left her every day, and I was out in the mountains. We were a really strong, close-knit family. We had enormous fun. Everybody in the family had a huge sense of humor, and so we laughed a lot. When I wanted to go to Africa, age 10, everybody laughed at me. I mean, it is a bit ridiculous. How would I get to Africa? We didn't have any money. We couldn't even afford a bicycle. Africa was the dark continent. We didn't know much about it. And girls certainly didn't do that sort of thing. So people would say, dream about something you can actually achieve, but not Mum. And I don't think she said it in these words, but the message from her, and the whole family actually, if you really want something and you work hard, you take advantage of opportunity and you never give up. I saved up enough money for a return fare to Africa by boat, because that was the cheapest in those days. So I was 23 when I waved bye-bye to family, friends and country and set off on this amazing adventure. And that adventure continues every day. Once I'd gained the chimpanzees' trust, which was mainly through one particular individual. For some reason, he was less afraid than the others. I named him David Greybeard because he had a beautiful white beard. And gradually, the others would be ready to run away, and they'd see David sitting there, and they'd think, well, she's not so frightening after all.
Now, what were some of the most, when you look back over your journey, some of the most poignant, most amazing moments for you, that when you sit there and you remember, that's that moment that really, really still speaks to you?
Well, there's so many. You know, there are so many. I will never forget the first time I actually was taken out into the African wilderness by Louis Leakey. And that was in Olduvai Gorge, and all the animals were there in those days. And it was just, you know, a little tiny tent. It was just magic. And then the first day that the chimpanzees, a group of them, actually let me approach without running away. That was just, and they just looked at me and carried on grooming. The day that the old female Flo allowed her precious new infant to come and reach out and touch me. And then I suppose David Greybeard using and making tools, and David Greybeard sitting as though waiting for me when I struggled through a tangle of vines, and when I held out a nut to him on my hand, he turned his face away, then he turned back, looked into my eyes, took the nut, dropped it, but hold your hand out. At the same time he gently held my hand, which is how they reassure each other. So we communicated perfectly.
Now you're doing a lot also with sustainability and conservation. I know those are some things going forward that speak to a lot of folks. What are you working on? I hesitate to ask because you're always working.
Well, there are two major programs which to me are very important. Conservation in a developing country will not work unless you involve the local people, who in our case anyway are living in poverty. So our Take Care program, which is improving the lives of the people in a very holistic way, and which we discuss in this film. And then of course there'd be no point my trying to kill myself raising money and awareness to try and protect chimpanzees and their rainforests or anything else if we're not raising new generations to do a better job than we've done. So the Roots and Shoots program for youth, which is now in 121 countries, and we've got about 16,000 active groups, age preschool right through university, even some adult groups. And you know, I mean, I've just come from Asia where Roots and Shoots is growing so fast right across mainland China and South Korea, Hong Kong. It's pretty amazing.
Well, I am so inspired by your work, and I'm sure all our viewers are as well, and it's a pleasure to have you and your
Mr.
little
H.
friend, Mr. H. It's a pleasure to see you, Mr. H. And Dr. Goodall, thank you so very much. It was an absolute honor and pleasure. Thank you.
Lovely talking to you.